Hello you cracking lot, it's Megagran here again with another episode from my vintage story. Now then, I was hiding in my cellar, doing a little bit of panning, waiting for the temporal storm to wane. It seemed to be going on forever, but eventually it did. And I collected quite a few things in my little hole, in my little water hole. But it was time to go out and sort out all this groaning. And there was a lot of groaning as well. So up I went with my spear in hand to see what the storm had left me. And thankfully, nothing was in my room, so that was quite good. It was snowing outside, but I braved the cold to see where all this groaning was coming from, and was confronted by a drifter resident on my balcony. I wasn't best pleased, really. How was I going to get rid of that? I did wonder if I took out a block from the wall whether I could spear it through the wall, or maybe the window, I could do it that way. In the end, I thought I'd just have a go with my spears. It wasn't one of those really bad drifters, it was sort of like the ordinary type of drifter. It was cornered, and I got it, which was quite good. There was something else throwing things at me though, and I couldn't quite see it. The sounds were coming from everywhere, and I spotted another one in the garden. I tried to get rid of it with my bow and arrow, but I never got good with a bow and arrow. Not at all. And being a tainted drifter, he had twice as much health as a normal surface drifter. So it did take quite a few arrows, but I really needed to hit it with them. It took a bit of dodging and weaving, and with another drifter right next to it, I did more dodging than anything else. But I carried on, and eventually I got it. In fact, I'd got two of them. I don't know when I got the other one, but he was there, dead. And then there was another one a little bit further down the garden, and I think stones being thrown at me from over the fence. So I had quite a bit of work to do. Only these spears weren't very good in this situation. And once or twice I did become a cropper. Not a total cropper though. And backing off and resorting to my sling would seem to be the better option. There was still a lot of groaning going on though. But it felt fairly safe now to go out into the garden and see if any of them had left me a little present. But I wasn't very lucky at all with the ones in the garden. But the one on the balcony left me some flax fibre, so that was quite good, not a total loss. With a little bit of jumping up and down, I managed to spot one just on the other side of my fence. And I thought the only way to get that one is to go down into the garden. I must admit, it was with a bit of trepidation that I set foot in my garden, and I tried to get myself into a position where I could just sort of slice it on the side. But it wasn't happening. The angle was a bit too acute, but then I think it heard my sling pinging and he came out to get me. I managed to dodge a lot of his projectiles though, and managed to get one or two in myself. It would take a while because this was another tainted drifter, so he had quite a bit of health. But I carried on slinging my shots at him, and each time my shot found a target, I was quite jubilant inside. But there was more than one groaning going on, so I wasn't about to go outside to get him. And I soon found my stones did their job. Haha. And you didn't see that. I could still hear growling, but I couldn't find where it was coming from. Might still be there in the morning. I might be able to see it better. Thought I'd go out the back and see what was happening round there. And after a quick recce, there certainly wasn't anything to be seen around my gardens. But looking further afield, there was a little bit of activity at Maddie's house. There looked to be several drifters around her back door, so I let her know that there were some growlers outside, and I went out to give her a little bit of neighbourly support. And I crossed my fingers and hoped that I didn't come a cropper to an insanely strong drifter. It wasn't an ideal situation, really, with it being the dead of night and snowing. Not very easy to see, but I could see the critters there. So I shuffled up, and when I got close enough to take aim, I let loose when I thought I could hit my target. I couldn't really tell which type they were from this angle, and in the snow, and in the night. And of course, once I depleted my supply of spears, I went on to my bow and arrows. Many of them, surprisingly enough, found their target. And once my arrows were depleted, I went back to my sling, and was hoping, once again, that I had enough stones to finish the job. It was quite difficult sometimes to tell if they were dead or not, so you had to be very careful approaching them when you thought they were, because another hit of the stone showed that they were actually still alive and moving. And this one seemed to be on the run, so I was feeling quite confident. And then another drifter came round the corner, and it had a very determined attitude and strode out towards me like he had a promise on. Luckily, with my sling, I could keep a distance between me and it and still hit my target. So I just carried on slinging my stones and making sure nothing was creeping up behind me. And its outline suggested that it was a corrupt drifter, one with a bit more strength than the other ones and a bit more health. So this could take quite some time. And finally, it was down. So I needed to go back to finish the one that I thought I'd nearly got, but he was still roaming around right there. It was at that moment that Maddie came out, and although I kept pelting her with my stones, before I could finish the job, she came off worse with their single interaction. Which was a crying shame, because he only needed one more hit, and he was down. And 2 more flax fibres later, that was the end of the infestation. In the morning, Maddie was able to give me a few oak logs so that I could finish my tanning process. And while I was waiting, I quite admired her little longhouse. She'd made it small, neat and compact, and made it very homely. She'd used red fire brick for the roof. It was low slung, and it had a long aspect, so she was able to fit a smithy on the end on the outside. Nice. Back home in my cellar, I'd got a weak tanning solution ready in 2 barrels. I added the 5 oak to each of them to make a strong tanning solution after 24 hours of sealing. And I was getting quite excited at the prospect of the final stage in my leather making. I was intrigued to see what difference a greenhouse made to raising crops in the cold weather, but I didn't have enough glass to do a big greenhouse. So I thought I'd make a little mini one and just see how things behaved inside it. I wasn't sure I'd get any information out of it or whether it was actually worth building it, but I thought I'd have a go. And I'd just put one here. The tiniest one ever. It would only have 3 bits of till soil in it, and I made sure it had a bit of water at one end. And I just planned to cover that with the glass that I had. But it only seemed to make a difference of 4 or 5 degrees, so I didn't think it would be that useful myself. But it would be a nice aesthetic if you were building a garden and wanted to have a greenhouse in it, I'm sure. But I would want to know that it made a real difference, because a difference of 4 or 5 degrees wouldn't enable you to plant much in the way of extra vegetables during the winter. Not when the temperatures often got below -15. Maybe it was for warmer climates than here. Maybe it just enabled you to plant things a little bit earlier than you would normally. But then you'd have to be very knowledgeable about what the temperatures were going to be. And after thinking about it, I really wasn't sure it was worth the bother. And I went off having to think a bit more about it. After doing several more jobbies around the house, to pass the time of course, My strong tannin was now ready to receive my prepared hides. It was quite an exciting moment, thinking this was the last stage in the process before I got my upgraded backpacks. So I sealed them both in and tried not to think too much about the 4.5 days it would take before it would be done. There was a wolf in my pit. That ewe was in a very precarious position because I was determined to get that wolf. There was quite a bit of dodging and weaving at that end of the pit, so I took aim and waited for my chance. It took some time watching them dart back and forth. Alas, all I did was show how inaccurate my aim was with a spear in a confined space. I hoped I hadn't done too much damage to the ewe as they both darted down to the other end. So I went down as well, keeping my eye on that wolf in the hope that I would get another chance to take it out. There was too much crossing over at that point, and I didn't want to take another chance with that ewe. So I just had to be patient and wait a bit longer and hope that they would separate enough for me to get that wolf. I also realised at this point that this was my last spear and that the 3 other spears that I had were down there in the pit. I didn't really want to use arrows because I was even less accurate with those. Suddenly the wolf darted for the other end, so I took aim and fired, only to realise that my attempt at being a farmer was over before it had begun. I was gutted. I'd waited a long time with that ewe. I was back on the server the next in real life day to find that several in-game days had gone by because other people had been on the server, and my leather was ready. So out it came, and I was getting really excited at the prospect of having more inventory space. So I was upstairs in a jiffy and crafting out my leather backpacks, 6 slots in each one. I totally emptied out my inventory this time and put my old backpacks in spaces wherever I could find them. In went my new leather backpacks, and just look at how much space I had. Wow. Or had been round to bring me a fruit press. It did take a lot of resources to make, and having just killed my only livestock, I didn't really feel like I needed one. You could make other things from it though, like fruit juice and other alcoholic beverages. But he wanted to share a little book he'd found in the use of the fruit press, where if you got some fruit mash and you clicked it into the fruit press, then click in an empty spot in your hotbar and then click back on the fruit mash, the fruit mash then reproduced itself. A bit cheaty if you ask me, but very useful if you have a lot of animals to feed. So I wasn't going to say no when the time came to use it. The snow was melting. Spring was coming. And I was so ready for it. I was fed up of seeing snow everywhere, but there wasn't a lot of it about now. It looked quite slushy now. So I started planting trees in the thought that they would all come up fairly quickly because it was spring and it was getting warmer. And I also had to keep fending off foxes that were trying to get at the chickens. I'd been fairly lucky with my chickens over the winter. None of the wolves had managed to jump over the fences to get in, which I'm told they could do if there was a lot of snow about, but I did keep removing the snow. I kept planting trees all over the place, and I was on the lookout for a fruit tree when I came across one. It was a funny looking thing, and I was aware if you chopped off a couple of the branches, you could replant them. So that was quite good. So I thought I would do and try it out, although it wasn't always successful. But I thought I'd give it a go. So I selected a limb to chop off. I did think that both of those would come down, but obviously I needed to chop that too, so I did that as well. And I left quite a funny looking fruit tree, but I'm sure it would grow. Back home after I'd emptied my inventory, I took my 2 little cuttings and went out to decide where I was going to put them. There was a little bit of space here in the side garden, so I thought I'd put it there. Didn't look like much. Pondered over where to put the other one. Didn't really want to put it in with the veggies, but I didn't know where else to put it really. But everything else seemed to be growing well, so I thought I'd give it a go around here. So I selected a little square of tilled soil and plonked it down there. And just checked that it said what I thought it had said. And it did. 40% chance of survival. Not very good odds, in my opinion. Well, it was spring and there were more animals about, and I spotted a ram, and I was determined to get it in my pit. So I thought I'd go up to it and just give it a little friendly slap. Not wanting anything else to happen except for it to follow me. And I ran as fast as my little legs could carry me, but it got a butt in. But I thought I was running fast enough. When I turned, it was right hot on my heels. So I ran and skirted round the edge of my pit. But before I got to the other side, it got me again. Oh dear. Well, it was nice respawning, at least, in the safety of my cellar. So I legged it back to get my stuff and to see if I'd been successful. And there it was. I had a ram in my pit. And I happily used my fruit mash to fill the troughs. I did look around for some time to try and get a mate for this ram. I had hoped that it might have been part of a little family. And I looked far and wide, around my house, of course. But there was nothing to be seen, except the usual little critters. Like rabbits. I was hoping that I might see a sow or a boar as well, because I did want to collect those. But there was just nothing. I don't know where that ram came from. I'm happy I got him, but I did want a little sheep family. But, however, my motivation to build a barn was renewed, so I decided to get some provisions together to start it. And as I went past the pit, I promised the ram a new home very soon. And I thought this would be the ideal place to make it. I might have to fill things in a bit and change some of the limestone gravel, and I thought I'd start with cobble walls. I'd planned to make little pens inside it, so the rams and the ewes were separated until I wanted them together, of course. I wasn't quite sure how big to make it, so I just thought I'd wing it. I think the howling with the wolves in Maddie's pit helped prevent more wolves spawning. I'd planned to have a mix of the cobble and some fencing. And I wanted the fencing to be in between the bits of cobble. And things seemed to be going along very nicely. I quite liked how it was looking. When I was on next, it was April. That had jumped forward a bit, so somebody had been quite busy on the server. It was late evening, there was low rift activity, and it was just 9 degrees outside. In the morning I went out to get back to work, and there was less and less ice on the lake. And I went to check to see whether anything else had materialised in my pit. But no, there was just ram there, although it did need some food. So I filled the troughs up with fruit mash again. It was coming in very handy, because the food did get eaten quite quickly, so I could imagine you needed a lot of it. So I got back to working on the barn. I had topped off the cobble with some of these mud bricks, but I decided I didn't like the look of them, so I took them off again. And I still didn't have all that many resources, and mostly I had a lot of pine. So even though I'd started off with maple, I decided to put pine at the top half of the barn. I didn't think it mattered that much, really. We'd see how it looked. If it looked terrible, I would go out and get some more maple. It was definitely going to have a roof on it, because I didn't want any wolves spawning inside it. And I thought I'd put mud bricks for the roof. And I thought I'd have a curved roof for the barn. It seemed to suit it. Most barns have curved roofs, don't they? Well, the day was getting on and the barn roof was almost done. And I was thinking about what I would do with the walls. It would definitely need some protection from the weather. I felt a little bit of symmetry was in order, so I made the back wall look like the front wall. Apart from the door, I didn't want a door on the back. I didn't have much cobble, I was running out of cobble, so the rest of it would have to be fencing. But I didn't think that was a problem, because goats and sheep usually lived outdoors anyway. They didn't usually have any protection, even when they were lambing, so I thought that would be fine. I carried on with the fencing, and as I was putting the pine fencing up, I was thinking that I wasn't quite satisfied with it. And it wasn't until I ran out and I turned round to see the opposite wall that I really didn't like the look of it. So I decided to use the mud brick and change the pine for maple, so they all fitted in together. And then, unexpectedly, I saw a ewe and a lamb running towards my pit. And before I knew it, I had a little family. I couldn't believe it. That was awesome. So I rushed back to get some more fruit mash to make sure this happy little family was as happy as they could be. It was almost as if that ram had come to suss out the area and had deemed it a suitable place for his little family. And along they came afterwards. That was awesome. So now there was even more of an urgency to finish the barn. So apart from the bottom layer of cobble, I changed everything into mud brick and maple. And I used maple in between the mud bricks. And I think that worked out quite effectively. So I decided to put another layer of maple just underneath the top level of mud bricks. And I think that went quite well. I quite liked it. I liked it a lot. I needed some gates now. As I was going to and fro between my base and the barn, it was nice to see things were growing. It was nice to see the trees regrowing. They were closer to the house, so that was good. And my little family of sheep were still doing fine. Awesome. And the barn was coming on too. I thought I might do a little overhang on the sides as well. It looked a little bit flat. And I made some gates for the inside. But did notice that they all went the same way, whichever way you were facing. I did try and change them round because I thought if the gates opened inwards, then it'd make it a bit smaller on one side. But I couldn't change them, they were staying that way. So I just hoped that there was enough room. I also had a thought that the sheep might be able to get out of there, especially if they stood on the trough. So I put a little bit of extra protection on both sides of the gate. And it was done. As I went past the chicken coop, I checked the hen boxes as usual. And I couldn't believe it when I saw some eggs. those were the first ones I'd ever had. I couldn't see any eggs in any of the other hen boxes, but then I did have a lot of hens in there. And maybe I should leave those in next time to see if we get any little chicks. So that's going to be about it for this episode. In the next episode, we'll get the sheep in the barn. My prospecting pick comes up trumps, and I'll do a little bit of mining with flues and OreSkull. And we find something very interesting deep down in the caves. So take care everybody, and I'll see you next week in the next episode. Bye bye.